Detroit's skyline did not begin with the Renaissance Center. It did not begin with the Guardian Building. It did not even begin with the automobile. It began with a 10-story building commissioned by a man who made his fortune in the meatpacking industry. When it opened around 1890, people traveled from across Michigan just to see it. They climbed to its roof to look over the city. Ships on the Detroit River watched signals from its upper floors. Lawyers filled its offices. Even the Detroit Tigers used this building to tell fans whether the team was playing that day. It was Detroit's first skyscraper. Today, it's completely gone. But that building started something. Within a single generation, this became the Wall Street of Detroit. A canyon of banks, office towers, and architectural landmarks where the money behind the Motor City was deposited, borrowed, invested, and eventually lost. Today, we're walking the streets where Detroit first learned to look up. This is Detroit's first skyscraper district, and this is Streets of History. When most people think about Detroit's rise, they immediately think about the automobile. Henry Ford, General Motors, the assembly line, factories stretching for blocks, millions of cars leaving the city for every corner of America. But Detroit was already becoming an industrial and financial powerhouse before the automobile transformed it. By 1880, Detroit had grown into one of America's fastest growing cities. Its factories were already producing railroad equipment, engines, boilers, machinery, stoves, and countless other products that helped build a nation. Before Detroit built cars, Detroit built the things that kept America moving. And all of that industry needed money. It needed banks, insurance companies, lawyers, investors, office space. Much of that business found its home right here on Griswold Street. These blocks sat near City Hall, the courts, the riverfront, and Detroit's busiest commercial district. It quickly became one of the most valuable places to do business in the city. By the early 1900s, people were already calling this Detroit's Wall Street. But before Griswold became a canyon of skyscrapers, one building had to prove that Detroit was ready to build upward. And that story begins with a butcher. George Hammond arrived in Detroit during the 1850s. He first operated a mattress factory, but after it burned, he entered the meatpacking business. It turned out to be one of the best decisions of his life. Hammond became a pioneer in refrigerated railroad transportation, helping transform the meat industry while building an enormous fortune. He eventually decided to leave his mark on Detroit with an ambitious office building unlike anything the city had ever seen. Sadly, George Hammond died before construction was completed. His widow, Ellen Hammond, carried the project forward. When the Hammond building opened, Detroit had never seen anything like it. 10 stories, steam heat, electric lighting, hydraulic elevators, hundreds of offices. For people living in the 1890s, this wasn't just another building. It was a glimpse into the future. Visitors traveled from all over Michigan just to ride the elevators and see Detroit from the roof. At night, its illuminated windows made it visible across the city. Weather signals displayed from the roof guided ships traveling along the Detroit River. Baseball fans even looked toward the building to see whether the Detroit Tigers were playing that day. The Hammond quickly became one of the city's most prestigious business addresses. Lawyers moved in by the dozens. Banks, insurance companies, railroads, restaurants. Politics were discussed inside. Businesses were built inside. Legal careers were launched inside. The Hammond wasn't simply Detroit's tallest building. It changed the way Detroit saw itself. For the first time, the city looked upward. But like all pioneers, it had its limitations.
This isn't just another real estate platform. This is something different. A place where every property has a story. Search with ease, but discover more than just location and price. Every space comes with context, history, and identity. You don't just see a home, you understand it. Want to sell? Create a listing that stands out by telling what makes your place unique. Save, share, and connect with people who value more than just square footage. We don't just sell homes. We take care of preserving and telling their story. Because every home has a story, Let's discover yours. History loves company.
The Hammond relied on massive masonry walls to support its weight. The taller buildings became, the thicker those walls had to be. A new generation of construction would soon solve that problem. Steel. Only a few blocks away stands the oldest surviving example of that new era. It may not immediately look like one of Detroit's oldest skyscrapers, because its exterior has changed dramatically over the years. But underneath those changes is Detroit's oldest surviving skyscraper. Originally built as the Chamber of Commerce building in 1895, it became one of the city's first steel-frame skyscrapers. Instead of relying on enormous brick walls to support the structure, the steel skeleton carried the weight. That allowed buildings to climb higher while creating larger interior spaces and bigger windows. The Hammond may have been first, but this is the oldest survivor, and it marked the beginning of Detroit's skyscraper race. Just down the street stands another fascinating piece of that story. This is the Ford Building. And despite the name, it has absolutely nothing to do with Henry Ford. It was developed by Edward Ford, whose family made its fortune manufacturing glass. Completed in 1908 and designed by the firm of legendary architect Daniel Burnham, the Ford Building helped convince Detroit that Griswold Street was still the city's financial center. Skyscrapers do more than provide office space. They send a message. They tell investors that a city is growing. They tell businesses that confidence is high. The Ford Building announced that Detroit wasn't slowing down. It was just getting started. Only a few steps away is another skyscraper with one of the most unusual names in Detroit, the Dime Building. It wasn't named after its height. It wasn't named after its architect. It was named after the Dime Savings Bank, where customers could begin saving with as little as 10 cents. A bank built on small deposits, eventually constructed one of Detroit's largest office towers. It's a wonderful reminder that even the smallest investments can help build something extraordinary. As more and more towers rose along Griswold Street, Detroit truly began earning its nickname as the Wall Street of the Midwest. But one family would take that ambition even further. They wouldn't build one Penobscot building. They would build 3. Most people only notice the enormous tower dominating Detroit's skyline. But the Penobscot is actually a family of buildings. The first opened in 1905. A second followed in 1916. Then, in 1928, the 47-story Greater Penobscot transformed Detroit forever. For a time, it ranked among the tallest buildings in the entire world. Think about that. Detroit wasn't simply competing with Chicago or Cleveland anymore. It was competing with New York. The skyline wasn't growing accidentally. It was growing because Detroit believed in its future. Every generation built higher than the one before it. Every new tower declared that Detroit's best days were still ahead. But these buildings were more than steel and stone. They were works of art. Architects like Wirt Rowland and sculptors like Corrado Perdusi filled these buildings with incredible craftsmanship. Stone carvings, bronze, terracotta, decorative entrances. Every detail reminded visitors that this wasn't just a financial district. It was a statement. That philosophy reached its absolute peak with the Guardian Building. Few buildings anywhere in America feel quite like this one. Originally built for the Union Trust Company, the Guardian wasn't designed to be just another office building. It was designed to inspire confidence. From the moment you walk inside, everything tells you that your money is safe. The marble, the tile, the soaring ceilings, the brilliant colors, the incredible craftsmanship. It feels more like a cathedral than a bank. And that was actually the point. Banks depend on trust. Architecture became one way of earning that trust. But timing can be cruel. The Guardian opened in 1929, the same year the stock market crashed. Within just a few years, Detroit's financial district faced one of the greatest crises in its history. Banks failed. Businesses collapsed. Confidence disappeared. In February of 1933, Michigan ordered banks across the state to close temporarily during the financial emergency. Imagine what that felt like. You wake up one morning and suddenly can't access your savings. The very buildings designed to symbolize permanence suddenly represented uncertainty. The district survived. The architecture survived. But history had changed forever. And in many ways, so had Detroit. Ironically, the building that started all of this didn't survive. By the 1950s, the Hammond was no longer one of Detroit's tallest buildings. It looked old-fashioned beside the sleek towers surrounding it. In 1956, demolition crews began tearing it down. Detroit's very first skyscraper disappeared. The modern building that replaced it reflected a completely different vision of progress. Glass instead of brick. Efficiency instead of ornament. Corporate modernism instead of 19th century craftsmanship. Neither building was necessarily right or wrong. They simply represented two very different generations and two very different ideas of what the future should look like. Today, Detroit continues changing. New towers rise. Historic buildings find new life. And the skyline continues evolving just as it always has. But every modern skyline has an origin. For Detroit, that story began right here. Not with the automobile. Not with the Renaissance Center. But with one ambitious skyscraper that taught an entire city to look up. This has been Streets of History. I'm Chris Hubble with History Loves Company. Every place has a story. Let's discover the next one together.